Disney is obviously a lot more well known for their animated output than their live action efforts. Because unless it's something like Mary Poppins, even when one of their live action movies is successful and well liked, it's usually independent from the fact that it was made by Disney. And most of the time, especially in their early years, most of their live action movies tended to be completely forgotten even if they initially did well. And that is a pretty big shame, since Walt Disney did oversee the production of some pretty inventive and creative live action films in his day, with one of the best examples of that being the 1959 film Darby O'Gill and the Little People. A story set in Ireland with leprechauns, banshees, and a very young Sean Connery. This movie has not only got everything, but deserves to be more well remembered, if only for its excellent and widespread special effects used to make the leprechauns look so small. And today, I'd like to go over this movie and particularly why it should be more recognized. And there will be spoilers ahead, so in case you'd like to see this movie for yourself first and don't want anything ruined, you should probably click off this video and come back after you have seen it. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay. So, to put it simply, Darby O'Gill and the Little People is Walt Disney's ode to Ireland, telling the story of a town drunk who isn't really a drunk that manages to not only find but befriend the king of the leprechauns, King Brian, and tries to get 3 wishes from him while the trickster king does everything he can to keep them from him. But it's all in good fun, of course. And while all this is going on, Darby O'Gill's replacement at his job, played by the aforementioned Sean Connery, comes to town and ends up romancing his daughter. And while that may sound like pretty standard stuff, things actually get pretty dark towards the end, with some of the more ominous Irish legends coming to life, such as the banshee and especially the death coach. Now, I won't give the ending away here, but in case it seems to get a little too dark, just remember that this is a Disney movie. But the main attraction here, other than hearing Sean Connery singing that is in the leprechauns themselves. And that goes for both how they appear in the film and for the relationship between Darby O'Gill and King Brian. Because even if they may be engaged in an eternal battle of wits, their friendship is extremely obvious, to the point that King Brian wants O'Gill to live with him after he finds out he's been fired, as well as, shall we say, does him a huge favor at the end of the film. But the point is, their dynamic is what makes up the core of the film, and befitting a Disney movie, contains perhaps the best relationship between man and leprechaun you'll ever see. But even apart from how they factor into the story, the leprechauns are what make this movie, simply for how great the special effects are for 1959. Because if you didn't know any better, you would swear that the titular Little People were actually real. That's how good it is. And that's exactly what Walt Disney wanted, to the point that King Brian is billed as himself in the opening credits, and special thanks is given to the Little People for their cooperation and participation. Basically, Disney wanted the audience to believe, without a shred of doubt, that the leprechauns were real, and the effects don't do anything to take away from that. He even had King Brian guest star on an episode of The Magical World of Disney to talk about why the Leprechauns decided to do the movie. And what's particularly notable about this is that none of Disney's efforts went to waste either, as once again, the results still hold up remarkably well even by today's standards. And keep in mind, back in 1959, there were no computers or CGI to assist in shrinking the actors, and it still, for the most part, looks amazing. Now, despite Walt Disney's efforts to hide the truth, you're probably wondering how they were able to get normal-sized actors to appear so small. And while most would assume that they used a green screen, that's not actually what they relied most on. Because while yes, certain shots were achieved that way, most of it was actually done with forced perspective. Which is to say, the actors playing the leprechauns were made to stand much further away from the camera than Albert Sharp, who played Darby O'Gill. And though that in theory might actually sound pretty simple, keep in mind that a lot of work has to go into achieving the desired results, since even if one of the actors or props is off by the slightest bit, it could ruin the whole effect. It's really a very tedious process to get right. They even famously blew out part of California for a particularly complex shot where the leprechauns are standing in several spots and thus all needed to be lit differently to maintain the illusion. And that's not even getting into how well the actors really sell that they're looking right at and talking to each other, when in reality they're a huge distance apart and looking and talking to nothing. And again, considering the chemistry they managed to have, despite being unable to even look at each other most of the time, takes an incredible amount of talent. And if you thought that making people look so small was already amazing, they also somehow managed to do it with horses too. But even if they're far and away the most notable, this movie does also have some other good effects too, particularly the aforementioned Banshee and Death Coach, which both perfectly do their job of being suitably terrifying, and once again for 1959 look pretty dang otherworldly. But as I always say, special effects alone don't make the movie, and this does have a pretty good story to back up those excellent effects. Again, it may be pretty simple in nature, but it still manages to tell that story rather well, being stacked in Irish folklore and ultimately serving as a love letter to many Irish customs and superstitions. Besides, you know a movie's doing something right when Sean Connery's performance in it managed to get the attention of the producers of Dr. No. Yes, that's right. It was Sean Connery's performance in this movie that landed him the role of James Bond. So while the movie itself may be all but forgotten today, its impact on cinema in that regard definitely has not. But either way, the point is that Darby O'Gill and the Little People is a notable film for many reasons, and honestly deserves to be more well remembered than it is today. It's got a nice story, serves as the perfect ode to Irish legends and culture, has great special effects that were not only amazing for their time, but also hold up surprisingly well by today's standards, and manages to do all of this while still having all the hallmarks of a typical Disney movie. And it also features Sean Connery singing, can't forget that. But not only does it get all the folklore right, and not to mention present the leprechauns in a pretty good light despite what you'd expect, it also manages to sell Ireland as a pretty magical place all on its own. Really, if there was ever a movie that would be perfect to watch around St. Patrick's Day to get one in the right Irish spirit, this would be it. Alright, I think that ends this video. So now I'd like to hear from all of you. Do you believe that Darby O'Gill and the Little People deserves to be more well remembered as a Disney classic, if for no other reason than the phenomenal special effects? Or do you believe it's simply average and has the reputation it does for a reason? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And please keep in mind that you do not have to agree with me or any opinions expressed in this video if you don't want to. You can feel about this or any other topic we discuss here, and if you think I couldn't have been any more wrong, I have no issue with that. And thank you all for watching. I very appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.